talking about removing your alternator, AC compressor, and your power steering unit. This video is actually a continuation video in a build series where I'm removing a 2005 WRX engine from a 1998 IMPREZA two-door coupe. Thanks for checking out the video. I'm Luke. This is the SubaruONLY show.
So that pulley can slide up and down that slot. Alright, we got both belts done. Alright, now is the alternator. An extension with a wobble fitting will actually make it a lot easier. Throw that sucker with the other parts. You should be able to lift it up and out of the way.
And just like that, we are done with another step from the master list. To guide us through this process, in one of my earlier videos, I made this 16-step list. And in this list, I walk through all the steps necessary to pull one of these turbo flat-4 motors from a Subaru vehicle with a manual transmission. As you can see, we're on step 8, remove the AC compressor, power steering unit, and the alternator. Okay, so let's head outside and take a closer look at this engine bay and how we're going to remove these 3 components.
Okay, so here's that engine bay, and here's those 3 components. The item on the left here, that's your power steering unit. The accessory in the middle, that's your alternator. And the accessory on the right here, that's your AC compressor. We're going to remove all 3 of these components, and we're going to remove both those belts. To walk us through this process, I actually made a sub-list right here that breaks it into 4 steps. Okay, let's walk through this first step. Remove the serpentine belts. Okay, now here are those serpentine belts. There's actually 2 belts. The first belt is going to go over your alternator and your power steering unit, and your second belt is going to be going over your AC compressor. Now the first belt we're going to remove is a belt that's on the outside, which goes over your alternator and that power steering unit. Now the way you relieve the tension on these belts so that you can remove them is a 2-step process. You're going to start by loosening this inner bolt here underneath the belt. Then, once that bolt is loose, you'll come up here to the top and you'll back this bolt out, and as you back that bolt out, it's going to cause the alternator to slide down and release the tension on that serpentine belt. I'll walk you guys through it right now. Step 1 is to loosen this lower bolt. It should be a 12mm bolt. A ratchet and socket should work perfect. Now just loosen it, don't take the bolt all the way out. Then go to that top bolt and back it out so you loosen the tension on that belt. I've gone a little further than necessary just so you guys get a good idea of how that adjustment bolt and that threaded bracket work. Once it's loose, you should be able to slide it off that pulley and remove it from the engine bay. And then take that sucker and keep it in a nice organized place with all the other parts. For right now, I'm storing my parts underneath here. Okay, next is a serpentine belt for this AC compressor. To take this belt off, we're going to start by loosening that lower pulley nut. That way, that pulley is free to slide up and down in that slot. Again, this should be a 12mm nut. But don't take it off, just loosen it so that that pulley can slide up and down in that slot. Then move over to the adjustment bolt. It'll also be 12mm. A socket and an extension work perfect for that, and then back that bolt out. As you back it out, you'll see that lower pulley slowly slide up in that slot. It should be sliding up in that slot. Once that belt is nice and loose, you can slide it off the lower crank pulley and remove it from the engine bay. Alright, we got both belts done. Take that sucker and put it underneath where everything else is being stored so we don't lose it. Awesome. Alright, we completed step 1, remove the belts. Now we'll move on to step 2, remove the alternator. Okay, now here's a close-up view of that alternator. Now to remove this sucker, we're going to start by removing this bolt from the adjustment bracket. Take that bolt out, that's step 1. Then you're going to move over here to the bracket that's holding the AC compressor, and you're going to pull that long bolt all the way out. I'll show you guys how I do that right now. Okay, pull that bolt out, it's 12mm. And then put that sucker aside, but don't lose it. Next, you move over to this long bolt that goes through the bracket that's holding your AC compressor and your alternator. Take that sucker all the way out. Again, it's another 12mm. And when you take this bolt out, it's actually threaded into a little bracket. This little bracket right here. So hold on to that bracket so you don't lose it, and the bolt is completely threaded out of it. Okay, here's that rear bracket with that welded nut to it. Then slowly slide that bolt out and then put it aside and keep track of it so you don't lose this sucker when you put it all back together. Once you remove those 2 bolts, you should be able to lift that alternator up and out of the engine bay. Alright, and that is the alternator. Let's set this sucker aside with all the other parts. Okay, now here's your AC compressor, and this is the next piece that we're going to remove. Now my AC compressor actually has the low pressure and the high pressure hoses removed. So I'm going to remove this AC compressor completely from my engine bay and set it aside. But for your application, you're likely going to have the hoses attached to your AC compressor. And if that's the case, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to disconnect this AC compressor from the aluminum bracket and then take that AC compressor with those hoses connected and just strap it to the side of your engine compartment against your fender or somewhere like that battery compartment area. Now what I mean by leave the bracket is that you want to leave this big, bulky aluminum bracket because this bracket has this little hole right here. This hole right here is where the Subaru designers incorporated one of the engine lift points into the AC compressor bracket. So what you're going to do is you're going to remove these 4 long bolts. That way the AC compressor can be removed, but you leave this big, thick aluminum bracket in place. Okay, I'll start with these top 2 bolts. They should be a 14mm size. Socket with an extension works perfect. For the bottom 2, an extension with a wobble fitting will actually make it a lot easier. Here's one of those lower bolts. That wobble extension gave me just enough flexibility to loosen that bolt so that I could remove it by hand. If your engine has one of these metal brackets that support the AC compressor from the outside, you can actually remove that bracket by taking out that 14mm bolt at the bottom that's threaded into the engine block. Okay, there's one of the upper bolts. Here's the second upper AC compressor bolt. Now I can remove this bracket, which should allow me to get to that 4th and final lower bolt. And the other bottom bolt. That's the 4th bolt, last bolt, and this AC compressor is ready to be removed from the engine. And store that sucker with the other parts. Now you can get a little bit better view of that anchor point for the engine hoist. And you can see how bulky that bracket is and how it's secured to the engine block by 3 heavy-duty 14mm bolts. This makes a great front engine lifting point. So leave this sucker in anytime you're going to pull an engine. Alright, that's step 3, remove the AC compressor, but leave the bracket. We're on to step 4, remove the power steering unit. That's this sucker right here. Now I've actually already removed the low pressure hose, but the high pressure hose is still connected. And you're likely going to have either the high pressure hose or both hoses connected. So the way you want to do this is you actually want to leave that high pressure fitting connected. You want to remove that power steering pump and that aluminum bracket with that hard line attached as one unit, and then pull it over to the side and then strap it to the inside of your engine bay. That's what we're basically going to do. But before you can do that, you actually need to free up these hard lines. Because these turbo engines have that expansion tank right here, you also have to remove this coolant expansion tank. And to remove this sucker, you have to remove that little nut down here and these 2 bolts up here. Once you remove this coolant expansion tank, those power steering hard lines will be free to be pulled back and strapped down to your engine bay. And regardless of what your configuration is, basically, the way these hard lines work is that you're going to be flexible back here at the hose section. All of the power steering hoses are going to have this flexible section over here at the back of the engine. So you need to remove any hardware and any obstacles for that hard line to be able to pull back and flex at that rubber section at the back of the engine. So that's what I'll do. I'll start by removing this coolant expansion tank, then I'll remove that bolt, then I'll move over here to that power steering bracket, and I'll remove the 3 bolts that hold this bracket on. There's 1 bolt right here, there's another bolt over here, and then there's 1 bolt back here. Right there, that's the 3rd sucker. Once you pulled all 3 of those bolts out, then you can remove the whole unit as one. Alright, to remove this coolant expansion tank, we're going to start by removing this lower nut. That sucker should be 12mm, so grab yourself a 12mm socket and a ratchet wrench, and you should be good to go. Then we'll remove these 2 suckers, these should be 12mm also. Throw 12 milli on that mofo. Alright. Boom, grab those two suckers. This coolant hose is still connected to my turbo, as you can see right here. So where do you disconnect it? You can disconnect from either side. I'm actually going to disconnect it from the turbo. That way the hose stays with this expansion tank, and I get it out of the engine bay, and it's one less thing to be in the way. Now remember, anytime you take one of these hoses off, it's probably going to be seized to the metal pipe, so you need to twist it before you pull it off. Now my coolant system is completely empty, but on your car, you might have a little bit of coolant left in there, so get ready with a plug and cap, otherwise you might get coolant all over the place. Okay, now we're almost ready to get this coolant expansion tank out, but there's one more spot you gotta disconnect. That's this lower hose right here. You gotta disconnect this lower hose, and you definitely wanna disconnect it right here at the point where it connects to that coolant expansion tank. So get your needle nose pliers, reach in there, squeeze that clamp down, and slide it back on that hose. That should be the last piece you need to remove, and then you can take this coolant expansion tank out of your engine bay. Long needle nose pliers work perfect for this. After you slid that hose clamp back, you should be able to twist that hose and break it free and slide it off the bottom of that coolant expansion tank. Bam, like that. Okay, that should be the last piece. Yep, and we're good to go. Let's take this sucker back to the shop. We'll put this sucker right here by the AC compressor. All right. We are looking good. Now we can remove that bolt. Will probably be a 10 millimeter. Make sure you keep that bolt organized. Here's that first bracket in the hole where we took that first bolt out. But on my engine, there's a second bracket holding these power steering hoses down, and that's this one right here. And that bracket actually has another bolt right here underneath, another 10 millimeter. Okay, both these brackets are completely free now. Okay, now in this power steering bracket, there's 3 bolts. There's one under here, there's one right here on the left side on the bottom, and then the third one is down here in kind of a difficult spot that's a pain in the ass. And with these 2 bottom bolts, you'll just use a socket and ratchet, and maybe an extension if you need it. Should be a 12 millimeter. Don't actually take that bolt all the way out. Just loosen it real good, and then move on to the other bolt, and loosen all 3 before you take the first one out of the threads. I'll try to show you a close-up view of that second one, so you guys know exactly what I'm loosening here. And here's that bolt I'm loosening. This bolt's on the bottom of the pulley on the left side. Okay, to get to that third bolt in the back, you're definitely gonna have to remove some of these hoses. That way you can get your socket and an extension right down through the top. So start pulling off hoses. You might also need to pull off some plugs, so don't hesitate to do that. And after you remove it probably feels like 20 or 30 hoses and plugs, you finally get access to that bolt. So drop your extension on a socket and get that bolt out of there. Drop a socket on it with the extension, and now that we have clear access, should be no problem to loosen. Since the other 2 bolts are already loosened, I'll go ahead and take this bolt all the way out. And that's the first bolt of 3. That's the second bolt of 3. And notice that locking adhesive that's on the bolt. Bam, that's the third one. All 3 bolts are out. We should be good to take this sucker out of here. All right, so let's see if we can get this sucker out of here. We should be able to lift it up and out of the way. Just like that. Put a rag underneath it and then tie it down with a bungee cord or something. Now that power steering system is no longer tied to this engine, and we're one step closer to pulling this sucker out of this engine bay. And we'll knock that one off the list. Number 4, remove power steering.
And just like that, we are done with another step from the master list.
We've worked our way down this list, and we're all the way to step 8. So I'm knocking it off the list, and we are one step further on this build. The next step is going to be the downpipe, but you're going to have to get to that one in the next video.
Because I got to wrap it up there for today, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video. I'm Luke, this is a SubaruONLY show. I hope you're enjoying this build series where I'm pulling this 2005 WRX engine out of a 1998 2-door coupe. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please leave it in the comments section. If you liked the video, please give it a like. Until next time, guys, later.